say mu. Earlier I had tried considering it the same as the Indian mantra Om, endeavoring to be one with its vibration, and without questioning what mu was. Now I began to conceive of mu as the diamond at the end of a drill and of myself as a driller working through layers of the mind, which I pictured as geological strata, and through which I was eventually to emerge into something I knew not what. On the morning of the third day I was truly concentrating, guided by the drilling analogy. I could now focus my mind somewhere in my abdomen without, however, knowing just where, and there was growing a rock-like stability to my sitting. By mid-morning, just after the roshi's lecture, I settled into a fairly deep concentration, increasing the force of each breath, which had been synchronized with the repetition of mu. I expected this increase of effort to strengthen the concentration even further. After some 15 minutes, the combination of this forceful breathing and the repetition of mu began to produce a strange tingling in my wrists, which spread slowly downward to the hands and fingers as well as upward to the elbows. When this sensation had gotten well underway, I recognized it as identical to what I had experienced under severe emotional shock on several occasions of my life. I told myself that if I increased even further the force of my breathing and concentration, I might come to Kensho. I did this and succeeded only in worsening the situation, finally reaching a fainting state. Just before this state erupted, I began to feel the most profound and agonizing sorrow, with which came violent shivering spasms and a gnashing of my teeth. Nervous paroxysms shook my body again and again. I wept bitterly and writhed as though a torrent of electricity was surging through me. Then I began to perspire profusely. I felt that the sorrows of the entire universe were tearing at my abdomen and that I was being sucked into a vortex of unbearable agonies. Sometime afterward, I can't say how long, I remember my husband ordering me to stop zazen and to lie down and rest. I collapsed onto my sitting cushion and began to shiver. My hands were now quite stiff. Neither my fingers, sticking out at odd angles, nor my elbows would bend. My head whirred and I lay exhausted. Slowly the nerves relaxed. In half an hour all had subsided, my energies had returned, and in all respects I was ready to resume zazen. At the afternoon Dokusan the roshi immediately asked what had happened. When I told him, he said it was a makio and to keep on doing zazen. Such things could happen from now on, he warned. They showed my meditation was deepening. He then instructed me to search for mu in the region below the solar plexus. With the words, solar plexus, suddenly everything fell into position. For the first time I knew exactly where I was going and what I was to do. The next morning, the fourth day, I awakened with the bell at a.m. and found that I had not separated myself from mu even while asleep, which was what the roshi had continually urged. During the first sitting period, before morning Dokusan, the previous day's symptoms began to appear. This time, telling myself it was only a makio, I kept right on, determined to ride it out. Gradually, however, the paralysis descended into my legs as well, and I could just hear my husband say in the distance somewhere that I was in a trance. I thought my body might begin to levitate, but still I kept on with my zazen. Then I fell over helpless and lay still. By the time I felt well enough to resume, morning Dokusan was over. I began to consider that I must be doing something wrong, misdirecting my energy in some way. During the rest period after the morning lecture, I suddenly realized that this center where I was being told to put my mind could only be a certain region long familiar to me. From early childhood it was the realm to which I had always retired inwardly in order to reflect. I had built up a whole set of intimate images about it. If ever I wanted to understand the truth of a situation, it was to this particular area that I must go to consider such problems, which had to be approached in a childlike frame of mind, free from prejudices. I would simply hold my mind there and be still, almost without breathing, until something coalesced. This I believed was the region the roshi intended. Intuitively I divined it, and with all my energy scented mu there. In perhaps half an hour a warm spot began to grow in my abdomen, slowly spreading to my spine, and gradually creeping up the spinal column. This was what I had been striving for. Highly elated, at the next dokusan I told the roshi that I had found the spot and described its functioning to him as I had always experienced it. "Good," he exclaimed. "Now go on." Returning to my place, I threw myself into zazen with such vigor that before long the paralysis began to manifest itself again, the severest attack yet. I could not move at all and my husband had to help me lie down, covering me with blankets. While lying there recuperating I thought, my body is obviously unable to stand up to the strain I am putting on it. If I am to see into mu it must be done with my mind alone, and I must somehow restrain the physical and nervous energies, which will have to be conserved for the final effort. This time when I recovered I tried to concentrate my mind without voicing or thinking mu, but found it difficult. In practice it meant actually divorcing concentration from breathing rhythm. However, after repeated efforts I did accomplish it and was able to hold my mind steady in my abdomen, as though staring intently at something, and just let my breathing take any rhythm it inclined to. The more I concentrated with my mind in my abdomen, the more thoughts, like clouds, arose. But they were not discursive. They were like stepping stones directing me. I jumped from one to the next, constantly moving along a well-defined path which my own intuition bade me follow. Even so, I believed that at some point they must disappear and my mind become quite empty, as I had been led to expect, before Kensho. The presence of these thoughts signaled to me that I must still be far from my goal. In order to conserve as much energy as possible, I relaxed my posture and, to warm myself, pulled the blanket, which had been loose around my body, up over my head. I let my hands fall limply into my lap and unlocked my legs to a loose cross-legged position. Even that small amount of energy placed at the disposal of my mind increased its concentrative intensity. The following morning at dokusan, the fifth day, the roshi told me I was at a critical stage and not to separate myself from mu for a single instant. Fearing that the 2 remaining days and 1 night might not be sufficient time, I clung to mu like a bulldog with its bones so tenaciously in fact that bells and other signals became dim and unreal. I could no longer remember what we were supposed to do when signals sounded and had to keep asking my husband what they meant. In order to keep up strength, I ate heartily at every meal and took all the rest the session schedule allowed. I felt like a child going on a strange new journey, led step by step by the roshi. That afternoon, going out for a bath, I walked down the road thinking about mu. I began to get annoyed. What is this mu, anyway? I asked. What in the name of heaven can it be? It's ridiculous. I'm sure there is no such thing as mu. Mu isn't anything, I exclaimed in irritation. As soon as I said it was nothing, I suddenly remembered about the identity of opposites. Of course mu is also everything. While bathing I thought, if mu is everything, so is it the bathwater, so is it the soap, so is it the bathers. This insight gave fresh impetus to my sitting when I resumed it. Each morning at about It was the roshi's custom to inspect and address all the sitters. Using the analogy of a battle in which the forces of ignorance and enlightenment were pitted against each other, the roshi urged us to attack the enemy with greater vigor. Now he was saying, "You've reached the stage of hand-to-hand combat. You may use any means and any weapons." Abruptly at these words I found myself in a dense jungle breaking through the darkness of the thick foliage, with a great knife swinging at my belt, in search of my enemy. This image came again and again, and I supposed that with Mu I was somehow to overcome the enemy, upon whom I was now closing in for the final dispatch. On the afternoon of the 6th day, in my imagination I was again slashing a path through the jungle, babbling to myself and searching ahead for an opening in the darkness and waiting for the flood of light, which would mean I was at the end of my trail. Suddenly, with a burst of inner laughter, I realized that the only way to overcome this enemy, when he appeared, was to embrace him. No sooner had I thought this than the enemy materialized before me clad in the costume of a Roman centurion, his short sword and shield raised in an attack. I rushed to him and in joy flung my arms about him. He melted into nothingness. At that instant I saw the brilliant light appear through the darkness of the jungle. It expanded and expanded. I stood staring at it, and into its center leapt the words, "Mu is me." I stopped short, even my breathing stopped. Could that be so? Yes, that's it. Mu is me and me is Mu. A veritable tidal wave of joy and relief surged through me. At the end of the next round of walking I whispered to my husband, "How much am I supposed to understand when I understand Mu?" He looked at me closely and asked, "Do you really understand?" "I want the roshi to test me at the next dokusan," I said. The next dokusan was some 5 hours away. I was impatient to know whether the roshi would confirm my understanding. In my heart of hearts I was certain I knew what Mu was, and I firmly told myself that if my answer was not accepted I would leave Zen forever. If I was wrong, then Zen was wrong. In spite of my own certainty, however, since I was still unfamiliar with Zen expression, I felt I might not be able to respond to the roshi's testing in appropriate Zen fashion. Dokusan finally came and I asked the roshi to test me. I expected him to ask only what Mu was. Instead he asked me, "What is the length of Mu? How old is Mu?" I thought these were typical Zen trick questions and I sat silent and perplexed. The roshi watched me closely, then told me that I must see Mu more clearly, and that in the time remaining I was to do zazen with the greatest possible intensity. When I returned to my place I threw myself into zazen once more with every shred of strength. Now there were no thoughts I had exhausted all of them. Hour after hour I sat, and sat, thinking only Mu with all my mind. Gradually the heat again rose in my spine. A hot spot appeared between my eyebrows and began to vibrate intensely. From it clouds of heat rolled down my cheeks, neck, and shoulders. I believed something must surely happen, at the very least an inner explosion. Nothing did happen except that I experienced recurring visions of myself seated cross-legged on a barren mountainside meditating and trudging doggedly through thronged cities in the scorching sun. At the next dokusan I told the roshi about these visions and sensations. He told me that a good way to bring this vibrating center now between the eyes, back to the solar plexus was to trace a pathway for it by imagining something like honey, sweet and viscous, trickling downward. He also told me not to concern myself with either these visions or the clouds of heat, both of which were an outcome of the prodigious effort I was making. The important thing was only to concentrate steadily on Mu. After a few attempts, I was able once more to re-establish this center in the solar plexus and to continue as he had bidden me. The following day, the 7th, I went before the roshi at Dokusan once more. From the 6 or 7 hours of continuous zazen, I was so physically exhausted I could scarcely speak. Imperceptibly my mind had slipped into a state of unearthly clarity and awareness. I knew, and I knew I knew. Gently he began to question me. What is the age of God? Give me mu. Show me mu at the railway station. Now my inner vision was completely in focus and I responded without hesitation to all his tests. After which the roshi, my husband, who interpreted, and I all laughed joyfully together, and I exclaimed, "It's all so simple." Whereupon the roshi told me that henceforth my practice in connection with succeeding koans was to be different, and then explained how I was to proceed. Too stiff and tired to continue sitting, I slipped quietly from the main hall and returned to the bathhouse for a second bath. Never before had the road been so road-like, the shops such perfect shops, nor the winter sky so unutterably a starry sky. Joy bubbled up like a fresh spring. The days and weeks that followed were the most deeply happy and serene of my life. There was no such thing as a problem. Things were either done or not done, but in any case there was neither worry nor consternation. Past relationships to people which had once caused me deep disturbance, I now saw with perfect understanding. For the first time in my life, I was able to move like the air, in any direction, free at last from the self, which had always been such a tormenting bond to me. 6 years later. One spring day as I was working in the garden, the air seemed to shiver in a strange way. As though the usual sequence of time had opened into a new dimension, and I became aware that something untoward was about to happen, if not that day, then soon. Hoping to prepare in some way for it, I doubled my regular sittings of zazen and studied Buddhist books late into each night. A few evenings later, after carefully sifting through the Tibetan Book of the Dead and then taking my bath, I sat in front of a painting of the Buddha and listened quietly by candlelight to the slow movement of Beethoven's A Minor Quartet, a deep expression of man's self-renunciation, and then went to bed. The next morning, just after breakfast, I suddenly felt as though I were being struck by a bolt of lightning, and I began to tremble. All at once the whole trauma of my difficult birth flashed into my mind. Like a key, this opened dark rooms of secret resentments and hidden fears, which flowed out of me like poisons. Tears gushed out and so weakened me I had to lie down. Yet a deep happiness was there. Slowly my focus changed. I'm dead. There's nothing to call me. There never was a me. It's an allegory, a mental image, a pattern upon which nothing was ever modeled. I grew dizzy with delight. Solid objects appeared as shadows, and everything my eyes fell upon was radiantly beautiful. These words can only hint at what was vividly revealed to me in the days that followed. The world as apprehended by the senses is the least true, the least dynamic, and the least important in a vast geometry of existence, of unspeakable profundity, whose rate of vibration, whose intensity and subtlety are beyond verbal description. Words are cumbersome and primitive, almost useless in trying to suggest the true multidimensional workings of an indescribably vast complex of dynamic force, to contact which one must abandon one's normal level of consciousness. The least act, such as eating or scratching an arm, is not at all simple. It is merely a visible moment in a network of causes and effects reaching forward into unknowingness and back into an infinity of silence, where individual consciousness cannot even enter. There is truly nothing to know, nothing that can be known. The physical world is an infinity of movement, of time existence. But simultaneously it is an infinity of silence and voidness. Each object is thus transparent. Everything has its own special inner character, its own karma of life in time, but at the same time there is no place where there is emptiness, where one object does not flow into another. The least expression of weather variation, a soft rain or a gentle breeze, touches me as a what can I say? Miracle of unmatched wonder, beauty, and goodness. There is nothing to do. Just to be is a supremely total act. Looking into faces, I see something of the long chain of their past experience, and sometimes something of the future. The past ones recede behind the outer face like ever finer tissues, yet are at the same time impregnated in it. When I am in solitude I can hear a song coming forth from everything. Each and everything has its own song. Even moods, thoughts, and feelings have their finer songs. Yet beneath this variety they intermingle in one inexpressibly vast unity. I feel a love which, without object, is best called lovingness. But my old emotional reactions still coarsely interfere with the expressions of this supremely gentle and effortless lovingness. I feel a consciousness which is neither myself nor not myself, which is protecting or leading me into directions helpful to my proper growth and maturity, and propelling me away from that which is against that growth. It is like a stream into which I have flowed and, joyously, is carrying me beyond myself. Peace of mind is not absence of struggle but absence of uncertainty and confusion. From an article on Yoga and Christian Spiritual Techniques, by Anthony Bloom. This refers to monastery session. Temple or other types of session are frequently less than 7 days. The sitting period of 45 minutes is measured by the combustion of a particular length of incense. For a brief description of the use of the Kyasaku in a latter-day Chinese Zen monastery, see John Blofeld's The Wheel of Life, p. This piece of information was given me by Yasutani Roshi. Sitters frequently ask for the Kyasaku by signaling with their hands in gasho above their head. Usually, however, it is preceded by a warning tap on the shoulder. In Rinzai the striking is from the front, so one always knows when one is going to be struck. Each shoulder is struck twice on points corresponding to acupuncture meridians. These are Hosshin-ji Soto rituals, differing slightly from Rinzai. Incidentally, Zen monasteries usually serve polished white rice, not brown. In monasteries where there is a large amount of manual labor the year round. For example, in those which raise their own rice as well as vegetables. Samu is dispensed with during sessions so as to permit more time for sitting. That is, levels of truth. Yakaseki, literally, medicine stone. Buddhist monks in ancient China ate only 2 meals a day. In the winter, to keep themselves warm and to relieve the pangs of hunger, they would place a warm stone, regarded as a panacea for all stomach disorders, over their bellies. From this the third meal, when it came to be eaten, was known as medicine. Quote, in most monasteries laypeople who come for session do not sleep with the monks in the zendo, but are given sleeping quarters in a separate building. A quotation from Dojin's Shibogenzo, originally found in Zenrui no, an early Chinese Zen work. This is not a Western but a traditional Japanese bed, which consists of a quilted mattress 2 or 3 inches thick spread over the regular tatami mats. See footnote. This page. That is, Buddhahood is latent in everyone. This is a reference to the second case of Mumunkan, the koan commonly known as Hyakujo's fox. A designation for the state of mind flowing from a deep realization that, since inherently we suffer no lack, there is nothing to seek outside ourselves. Sanskrit words meaning satori wisdom and compassion, respectively. Eradicating from the mind the notion of a Buddha as opposed to an ordinary being. Ridding oneself of the idea that Shakyamuni Buddha is God or a super being. Obliterating the subtle pride which arises from Kensho and leads one to think, now I'm a Buddha, this is killing the Buddha. Wash your mouth when you utter the name Buddha, is another widely misunderstood Zen expression. It comes from the 30th case of Mumunkan in the comment of Mumon. Don't you know that one has to rinse out one's mouth for 3 days after uttering the word Buddha? This is not a reference to Shakyamuni Buddha the person but to Buddha nature or Buddha mind. Everything is complete and perfect in itself. A stick is a stick, a shovel a shovel. Use a shovel and you know its shovelness in a direct, fundamental way. But describe it as Buddha or Buddha mind, and you needlessly sully it, that is, add to the name shovel one more concept. Gempo Yamamoto Roshi, who was retired at the time. See this page. A great Chinese Zen monk painter who lived in the 10th century. Most of his paintings in Japan are national treasures. See section VII. This condition can be compared to that of a newly hatched chick, whose life, while real enough, is still fragile and tentative. This question was addressed to Bodhidharma by Emperor Wu of Liang, a renowned Buddhist patron. The emperor next asked, "Who are you? Are you not a holy man?" To this Bodhidharma retorted, "I don't know. One of the points of the koan is to grasp the spirit of this, I don't know." Quote, "It is interesting to read of the Catholic abbess St. Teresa counseling her nuns. Strive like strong men until you die in the attempt, for you are here for nothing else than to strive." Quoted by E. Alison Peers in the preface to his translation of the autobiography of St. Teresa of Avila. For a more precise statement on koan zazen and shikan taza, see this page. See also, consciousness, in Zen vocabulary. For the full conversation, see, Hakurakuten, in Zen vocabulary. That is, mind. See section VII. These lines are from the commentary on Case in Hekigan Roku. The Sri Aurobindo Ashram, in Pondicherry. An ashram is a spiritual retreat or religious community. The first 5 of the 10 Mahayana precepts. See, precepts, in Zen vocabulary. Ordinarily, the instruction is to direct one's attention to the tanden, or hara, that is, the lower belly. But since for this student the solar plexus had special significance, the roshi told her to place her attention there instead of in the usual place.